Labor Day just around the corner, we thought this would be a great time to learn more about the labor movement in Minnesota. Here to tell us all about it is the head of the Minnesota Tonight's brand new Writers Union, Lauren Chesnut.
Thanks, John. But just because I'm doing this doesn't mean I've forgotten that labor and management are mortal enemies. For most of us, Labor Day means retiring our white short shorts, Congress finally getting back into session, and using a holiday to justify a 3-day bender. But the real purpose behind Labor Day is way more fun. It's celebrating America's great tradition of class conflict and the constant struggle against wage slavery.
Sounds fun, yeah.
And that struggle is real. Recently, Minneapolis scored some big legislative wins for working people, but of course, those wins are being challenged by business interests before they've even been implemented. Right now, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce is suing the city of Minneapolis to restrict its sick leave ordinance, which could set a legal precedent to also block the city's new $15 minimum wage. And this is ridiculous. I can't even walk past a Target without spending at least $15. And considering most working Minnesotans don't enjoy union protections, these legal battles could have a significant effect on workers' lives. See, for a long time, labor activism in Minnesota was bigger than the Beatles. But like John Lennon, in the early 80s, it went into pretty steep decline. Too soon. Still, by 1983, about a quarter of all working Minnesotans were members of labor unions. Today, though still above the national average, the numbers are closer to 14% and even lower in the private sector. The truth is, the American labor movement is like your third-grade class hamster. Everyone was obsessed with it when they first got it, but took it for granted after about 2 weeks, and at the end of the year, no one's even noticed that Speedy hasn't moved since before spring break. R.I.P. Take the meatpacker strikes at the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota. In 1933, when the labor movement was young and energetic, meatpackers there staged the first successful sit-down strike in U.S. history, establishing their right to organize and collectively bargain. You'd think that kind of class-based solidarity would continue to serve as an inspiration for today's underpaid and underappreciated workers. But tragically, I'm currently the only member of the Writers Union. I keep trying to organize a staff viewing of the classic Disney live-action musical Newsies, hoping those scrappy singing and dancing kids will help my fellow writers realize what a union can do for them. But since no one will RSVP to my Facebook event, I'm using this segment to educate them. And I'm not sure that our audience understands that we have to write the show with only like 2 weeks' notice. What is this, China? And speaking of sweatshop labor, did you know that all 24 of us have to share one pizza before each show? We should be ordering at least 2 and jumbo size. Quit skipping, boss man. But back to history. The 1930s saw a flurry of labor organizing, and owing to that pressure, a ton of workers' rights legislation was enacted across the country. Without these laws, we wouldn't have the 8-hour workday, lunch breaks, or any safety standards. Before unions, there was no retirement age. Workers usually died in some kind of horrific, preventable industrial accident by the time they reached this many. Thankfully, that all changed when reformers helped establish child labor laws, finally taking on the fat cats of the tiny coffin lobby. But it didn't take long for those achievements to be taken for granted and for unions to seem unnecessary. In 1985, when workers at that same Austin Hormel plant walked off the job in the face of a 23% wage cut from what was then the most profitable company in the meatpacking industry, workers got little support from their national headquarters, and the union nearly disintegrated before giving in to Hormel's demands, which meant that Hormel's employees suffered a significant loss in pay, and that a can of Spam has a longer shelf life than the very union that packed it. Which reminds me of just last week, when John cut the staff energy drink budget nearly in half. This is inhumane. And personally, I think it's outrageous that we writers have to work for free when this is the most profitable Minnesota-based local news satire show performed at the Brave New Workshop on the 4th Wednesday of the month in the country. I know, right? And to make matters worse, since the 80s, anti-labor activity has spread from business crackdowns on unions to legislative crackdowns on workers in general. For example, in 2015, Wisconsin Governor and melted Keanu Reeves, Scott Walker, signed a budget proposal that eliminated a state law guaranteeing at least 1 day off for every 7 days worked. A guy who looks that sleepy all the time actually tried to eliminate the weekend. 48 hours I personally try to spend at least 20 of unconscious. Of course, that could never happen here. That's Wisconsin, right? Their state motto is, whatever Paul Ryan thinks Ayn Rand said. But in fact, until fairly recently, Wisconsin was as much of a union stronghold as Minnesota. It was the first state in the country to establish workers' comp, unemployment benefits, and provide collective bargaining for public employees. But in 2011, our pal Scott Walker introduced a bill that ended those rights for public employees, severely crippling labor unions. We're all used to Wisconsin getting politically cow-tipped, but their policies are now becoming a problem for us. Next year, Minnesotans will vote for a new governor, and many of the Republican candidates have said that they want to make our state more like Wisconsin. Republican hopeful Jeff Johnson actually said he wants to go all Scott Walker on Minnesota. Yes, which is how Scott Walker describes a steamy hand-holding session with the missus.
So let me get this straight. Is the Minnesota Tonight Writers Union worried about these candidates?
Well, actually, Local 547 is focusing on recruitment. Our numbers are at a record low. And I'm pretty sure we're getting tips at the end of the night that you've been wage thefting from us.
Lauren, I have not been wage thefting you. No, none of us gets paid. We're all on the same plane.
No, listen to me, John. I'm standing up for what's right and what's fair. You need us more than we need you.
Well.
Go ahead. Make a joke about Scott Walker.
I can't. There's nothing on the teleprompter for me to say.
Yep. Exactly. Without us, you'd never be able to say, Scott Walker looks like Mitt Romney's before photo. Or Scott Walker looks like he's currently failing a vision test. Scott Walker looks like he just farted and he's waiting for you to smell it. Scott Walker looks like the villain in every straight-to-DVD movie. Scott Walker looks like the only youth pastor who can't play the guitar. Scott Walker looks like the reason his parents got divorced. Scott Walker looks like an out-of-work erectile dysfunction actor. Scott Walker looks like he gets hazed by his own kids. Scott Walker looks like a rat, but more specifically, this rat, Remy, from Disney's animated film Ratatouille.
Okay, I take your point.
You've taken enough from me, John. Johnny Deep Pockets Rockefeller Kennedy Vanderbilt. Workers have organized and fought hard to get wage earners more stability. And as union membership and activism declines, so do employee benefits, pay, and rights. If we've learned anything in the past few years, it's that mass organizing efforts can pay off in removing people from office and halting brutal legislation. If we stand together, we can accomplish anything, up to and including singing in 4-part harmony about our labor struggles. It's not just about factory workers in unlivable conditions or musically talented newspaper boys facing cruel pay cuts. It's also about anyone who's been called in on their day off or been expected to answer emails at home or had to adjust to half as many energy drinks as they've become accustomed to. Caffeine withdrawal is for real, you guys. So, Minnesota Tonight writers, who's with me? I don't think any of you are writers. What do we want? You guys are doing a great job, but I don't think you work for this show. Organizing is hard.
Lord Chesnut, everyone!
Minnesota tonight.